Hey, and welcome to day 5 of the challenge, where we are going to be celebrating the end of our journey towards creating the painting habit. Actually, it's just the beginning because now that you have gone through all of the stages of creating a new habit, we're ready to look at what comes next. But before we do that, let's back up for a minute and talk about that last stage of creating the habit loop and talking about how you reward, evaluate, and assess where you've come and how you've come there in creating that new habit. So let me share my screen here for a minute and let's just go back through really quickly what is involved in creating that habit, that new habit loop that we've been talking about. So the habit loop begins first, remember, with knowing your why, with knowing what it is that you're trying to accomplish by generating this new habit. Then we want to develop cues, anchors, or triggers that are based in our 5 senses. That helps us to really have a sturdy foundation of pre-actions that will lead to creating that new routine, set you up for success, in other words. When you stack those cues together, you are doing something called habit stacking. And habit stacking is what develops into that routine. At first, it will feel awkward, won't feel that comfortable because you haven't done it enough. There are not enough repetitions yet for it to be completely natural and unconscious. So, stacking those habits, stacking those cues rather, called habit stacking, develops a routine. And remember, routines are not necessarily negative, that we need a routine or a system in order to fully be able to develop our creativity. Creativity flourishes within a structure. Once you've developed that routine, you need to reward yourself for accomplishing it. And that's where we get a little hit of dopamine because we've given ourselves some positive reinforcement. Remember, the human being, animals in general, does not respond well to negative reinforcement. We respond better to positive reinforcement. So make sure that you create some sort of reward for yourself for accomplishing and developing your new habit. Give yourself minor rewards all along the way. Know that it's going to take up to about 90 days to really cement that new routine. Include rewards along the way. Gives you a dopamine hit. You want to make sure that reward is in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish so that then you can give yourself a high five when you do it. The last step, the step we're talking about today, the one I want to spend a little bit more time on, is reflection. And reflection is what so many people leave off. And then they wonder why it doesn't stick because they haven't figured out how it really relates to them. They haven't looked at what's working and what's not working and what they could do differently. So, reflection is reflective critique. We use the same process that you use in critiquing your own work or anybody else's. Use the critique sandwich. Think about what worked well. What were some of the things, 2 or 3 things that really helped you, in particular, look back at the other parts of the habit loop? What were some of the cues and anchors that worked really well? What were some that didn't? It might be the kind of music you listen to, or the fact that you didn't listen to music. What smell trigger worked really well? But really look closely at the things that worked. Then look at and reflect on a couple of the things that just didn't feel like they're you. A couple of the anchors that we might have talked about that just didn't work, that didn't help you get into studio time. Because what we're trying to create with the habit loop is studio time. And studio time is not a place, it's not a physical space. It's a frame of mind. So what did not work in getting you into that mind space? That's where that inner game of painting happens. And list that out. Think about how you're going to take that away or alter it so it works for you. That's that final step there. The second part of the critique, third part of the critique sandwich. It's when you're adding in what might work better. It's adding back in more of what worked. Excuse me, because that's going to cement that idea and that habit. So what worked, what you could do differently, what didn't work, and then again, what really was effective. Now, it does not matter exactly what format that assessment takes. Some people prefer journaling. Some people prefer a spreadsheet. Some people love a check sheet. You've got a tracker in the back of your challenge guide. Absolutely use that, because that helps you keep up with things and just marking off that you actually did it. But I'm going to make one really strong recommendation here, and that is that you put pencil or pen to paper, because our brain processes information very differently when we actually make a mark on a physical surface. It sinks in more deeply than when we're making a tick mark on a computer. So I highly recommend that you do something on paper, whether it's in your sketchbook or a journal, or just on a check sheet where you're actually marking some things off. And that will help you as you process down the road on maintaining that painting habit. Because remember, let me turn this off for a minute and go back to the screen. Remember that this is just the first stage of the journey in becoming a confident painter, a confident artist. That what creates that level of confidence is not just getting in the studio. That's the first stage. Because if you're not painting regularly, if you're sitting around like we've talked about all week and waiting for inspiration to happen, that's inviting nothing to happen. Because inspiration is not what drives creativity. Inspiration appears in the process of showing up. So, first goal of becoming a confident painter is to develop that painting habit and create your own studio mindset so that you're going to show up and do the work. When you show up like that, you're giving creativity a space to appear. The next thing that really, really helps in developing that level of confidence and becoming more attuned into being in flow is to develop your skills. In other words, develop your mastery. And I want to qualify what I mean by mastery. I don't mean that you're going to turn into Leonardo da Vinci. I don't mean that at all, because that would take lots and lots and lots of time. There is no final there. We're all developing as artists all along the way. But you need to keep pushing yourself to develop those skills. That's what I mean by mastery. Continuously developing your skills. The more skill set, the more skills you have, the easier it becomes to get into flow, because you're not struggling with how to make things work. Now, there is a long game to getting there, and you absolutely can do it completely on your own, with the qualification there that if you do it on your own, you're liable to make some segues to the left or the right that involve some wrong turns. And those wrong turns can derail you for a while, because what can happen is you can create bad habits. We've talked about developing good habits, but bad habits can develop as well. And they happen through repeating processes over and over again that aren't effective and don't work. So what's the way to bypass those processes? That has to do with working with somebody else who is a little further along that path than you are, who can guide you away from those pitfalls, who can help you develop a process for developing those skills that will move you further and faster. And what we talked about in last night's demo was the painter's language framework, which is the framework I use and I teach inside my courses to my students on how to develop their skills and mastery so that they don't fall into those side lines and rabbit holes and pitfalls and develop bad habits, that help you develop good habits much more quickly. So looking at the painter's framework, it goes through 5 to 7 steps, depending on whether you're going to include adjustment phases in there. The first one is developing a strong composition, having a definite focal point, really reflecting on what is going to be the most effective composition. And that means cropping until it hurts. Cropping, cropping, cropping. Not being satisfied with the first thing that pops up. Second step is to practice the art of seeing, which means you're going to really work through the value relationships, the value masses that you see. And I advocate that people create a thumbnail to do that. It helps tremendously in being able to see the overall pattern of what you're looking at. And it applies whether you're talking about landscape, portrait, still life, figurative, abstract, non-objective. The subject matter doesn't matter, the principles stay the same. Then developing the notan. The notan is the black and white value relationship or balance in an artwork. After that comes blocking in or mixing your colors rather first. And one of the reasons that I talk about mixing color first in all mediums, not just oils, one of the reasons I do that is because, as we've talked about all along this week, if the color looks good on the palette, it's going to look good on the painting. That making all of these decisions, you notice everything I've talked about so far is a decision-making process that happens before the painting happens. When you do that before the painting happens, it means you can dive into painting confidently and get into flow without having to interrupt flow to back up and make a left brain decision. Flow state is the right brain taking over. And you want to eliminate by doing all of those left brain activities ahead of time. So mixing the color ahead of time means you're not having to stop and think about it while you're actually painting. Then the next stage after that is to begin that block in, where you're going to give each of those basic shapes you identified in your thumbnail a color and a value. And at that point, it looks very, very simple because you've just added the basic colors, but you've eliminated all of that empty white space on the picture plane. And it's much easier to dive back in there. And the last stage is to adjust, to develop and adjust those shapes, values, colors, hues, temperatures, and intensities to the degree of representation or detail that you're after. So it's a relatively simple process, but one that incorporates some kind of unique tricks along the way. And I talked about those in the demo last night a bit, that one of the things, and I'll talk about it a little bit more as we have our celebration today at noon, show you some examples of that. But I think the real key difference between the way I teach it and the way other people teach it is A, working out those value masses, not doing a sketch of the thing, working out those value masses ahead of time, using that as your roadmap in painting and mixing those colors ahead of time so that you truly can paint in flow. So we're going to be going over that a little bit more during our 12 noon broadcast. And we're going to be announcing the recipient of the new, not new, we're going to be announcing the recipient of this cohort's scholarship for composition, color, and light, which will open during our celebration today at noon. So be sure to be there so that you can see and hear about who is going to be joining us on that journey. If you have not filled out the survey yet to apply for the scholarship, be sure to do that on the replay page. So click to go to the replay page, The link is in your email here. And if you're watching this, you're on the replay page. It's up at the top. Fill that survey out by noon, and we will be pulling a number randomly from the list of people who've applied to hand that scholarship out. Look forward to seeing you at noon. Happy painting, everybody. Bye-bye for now.